human. At Big Self School, we've been building Emma AI as a way to help leaders and teams grow with more clarity and courage. And I just want to introduce this conversation that we're going to have on today's show with why I think it's particularly fascinating, the research that Vanessa Drucker has done, and why I wanted to talk with her on the show in particular. So in Emma, our coaching assist AI team optimization platform, it does have real value in one-to-one coaching. And our Enneagram test is one of the most accurate available, especially for teams. The 360 draws on years of research, and the feedback it generates for an individual, but especially the way it's created to work on teams, is powerful. And it's the real rocket fuel is what happens when you put these hands in the tools of teams. The Enneagram test that doesn't just tell you who you are, but shows where you stand on a team heat map, and a 360 designed for entire groups to take together so feedback becomes a shared experience, not just a solitary one. And our team health survey, it gives organizations a way to measure whether the rituals they're building actually move the needle. And that's why I wanted to bring on Vanessa Druskat. She's the author of The Emotionally Intelligent Team and a leading researcher in what truly makes teams perform. Her work is a reminder that workplace improvement isn't just about an individual raising their EQ or about personality tests in isolation. It's about the emotional norms and practices a team shares that can unlock lasting results. And Vanessa has spent decades studying how groups collaborate, how bringing belonging and trust into a team, how it forms, and how to design team cultures that actually do stick. And her contribution to workplace culture is right on the nose for what we're exploring with our clients and our listeners. And so we're just excited to have her on the team. Vanessa's team emotional intelligence is about group level norms and routines, not just putting together highly emotionally intelligent individuals. And her recent book, which you all must check this out, The Emotionally Intelligent Team, Building Collaborative Groups That Outperform the Rest, published by Harvard Business Review. It outlines a model of how 3 clusters of norms help one another succeed, learn and advance together, and engage stakeholders, is based on decades of research. And belonging is central to that. Feeling accepted, valued, having influence in the team. It's the glue that holds high-performing norms together. And she's spoken about pitfalls a lot too, how having norms that are too loose or vague, right? Norms that don't get lived, failing to attend to emotional safety, or failing to embed norms across different settings, whether it's virtual, hybrid, or in person. You got to check her book out on that subject. So that is a little bit of laying out why we are having this conversation with Vanessa today. Vanessa Drucker, welcome to Leading Human.
Thank you, Chad. I am very happy to be here with you and your audience.
Well, it's a real delight. Let's hop in with your model emphasizes that emotionally intelligent teams are built through these shared norms and routines, not just putting together emotionally intelligent people. So, could you just walk us through a story where you saw that distinction making a huge difference?
Sure, I'm going to walk you through one of my favorite stories, but I've got plenty of stories if you want to hear more. One of my favorites is a team of engineers that my colleague and I worked with, and they're they were all leaders of divisions, and they were losing market share. And they started getting frustrated and arguing with one another. They were very talented people, but they were blaming each other for the problems. Their team lead got let go, and the new team leader was brought in, and the new team leader was having a hard time with their negativity, so brought us in. And so we immediately, after they spent yelling at us and telling us that team building was not anything worthy of them, that really the problem was that people just needed to work harder. Anyway, we calmed them down, and eventually we got them talking to one another and interacting in a more productive way. So, listening more carefully. We have a norm in our model, and just to remind you and your listeners that all the norms in our model, we have 9 of them, have all come from our research looking at what really great teams do. And
Mhm.
one of these norms is called caring behavior. And basically, that means that you send verbal and one another and are supportive of one another. They were, here, I'll give you an example in a second because I can tell you what they decided to do. They were in such a funk that they weren't listening to one another. They weren't sharing information. They weren't sharing ideas across the division. So we showed them the data. We had data showing that they had very low caring behavior. People did not feel respected in that team. And they said, well, what do we need to do to demonstrate more respect to one another? One of them said, well, let's nod our head and look one another in the eye when we're talking. It started out as a joke. We watch nonverbals. And so what happened is the process that they used to interact with, require them to be emotionally intelligent, did require them to nod their head and look. And guess what? They started sharing more information. They started listening more deeply. And then someone would say, well, Chad, I've got an idea for that. I had that same problem in my organization, what I did. Started sharing things, and they ended up really improving their process. And they also selected a couple of other norms in our models that they worked on, but that will change. And it was literally, just a change in the way they, and it's the interactions that matter. So you could have a lot of emotionally intelligent people in a room who aren't necessarily nodding their head carefully to one another. Feel like you're being listened to, you tend not to listen well. And I know this because I know emotionally intelligent individuals, having a lot of emotionally intelligent individuals in your team doesn't predict team emotional intelligence. Feel respected and cared. Does that make sense?
It is surprising and I think a profound insight that your book and research is offering up. And it does make sense on a number of levels. We are so tribal, and it makes so much sense, even from an evolutionary behavioral perspective. I don't know why we've kind of been missing this or just emphasizing how there's this idea of start with yourself. But your example right there was interesting to me because, in a certain way, thinking of how engineers too often do communicate, it's this rudimentary, super basic, let's look each other in the eye and at least pretend sort of like we're listening was a beginning point. I'm sure you could break it down and analyze the why. I guess they were looking for anything, perhaps, and they were open to whatever. Maybe that led to their openness to even try to begin to have a little bit more respect for each other.
Well, the other thing that we did when we were working with them, basically had a day and a half with them,
Mm.
was we did an intervention that helped them get to know one another better. So
Mm.
they didn't understand one another's backgrounds, or they didn't understand the similarities or differences that they had. And so and I often do this with teams because team leaders don't like to waste time getting to know,
Right.
right? And so, I mean, I know that, I know you work with the Enneagram, and, just getting to know one another's personalities and proclivities is hugely important in a team. And your values and what you care about and how you think through problems, it matters a lot. And so we started off with that. And I just remember one example where one guy said, well, yeah. Another one said, oh, what do you mean you don't talk on the phone? And it was kind of he was kind of a weird dude, just an interesting dude. And
Yeah.
he said, no, I don't talk on the phone. Okay. And nobody knew that. And people just thought he wasn't returning their calls. And he, minor little thing, but we see ostracism, rejection, negativity in small actions. And they didn't realize,
Mm.
actually what a good guy he was. He ended up being really instrumental in making a lot of the changes that we made.
That is so true that those little things that we do interpret in our own way, and it makes, well, why aren't they initiating more? Or why aren't they responding? I would respond much faster,
Yes,
right?
yeah,
Yeah,
exactly. You look at it through your lens. You don't look at it through their lens because you
that's
don't know
right.
them.
Yeah.
You don't know who they are. And that's one of the problems. I was working yesterday. I had a bunch of work with a friend of mine who's works with teams, and we were just talking about building psychological safety in teams. Which is this sense that you're safe and you can support. People can say what they want in the team, and they don't have to fear being
Absolutely.
harmed in any way for disagreeing or what have you. And my friend, was saying, well, it's the way the leader interacts with you that creates that psychological safety. And I said, yeah, well, the norm starts with the leader, but this is about relationships among the team members. This is not
Mm.
necessarily about relationships just with the leader, right? Feel with the leader, and honestly, creates that kind of environment, the better off we are. But
Yeah.
where it really matters, and this is the thing that we don't teach leaders, is it's all about the interactions with one another in the team. And you could burn a relationship if you disagreed with someone, or you could, there's so many reasons why you wouldn't speak up, see something negative in a team, and that you wouldn't feel psychologically safe, and not just because of the leader, but because you don't know the team members. Does that make
It does. It makes a lot of sense. And I think I've heard you discuss this before about if, like, say, there's a behavior that a leader it's a non-negotiable for the leader.
yeah.
There's some things that are, but say this one is some kind of accountability that matters a lot to them. Should they be the only ones having to hold that person accountable? It's more impactful if the team does. Did I hear that correctly?
Yes, absolutely. It's not just about accountability. Accountability is we have a norm in our model that we call addressing unacceptable behavior. Sometimes we call it addressing unhelpful behavior because people prefer that word unhelpful to unacceptable.
Right.
It depends on the team and
Yeah.
the culture. And that is everybody's favorite norm because everybody thinks about accountability and how important accountability is. And everybody's had problems with accountability in teams. There's this
Hmm.
term that we call in psychology, we call social loafing, which is you don't have to work so hard when you're in a team because you can relax a little and other people pick up the slack. It's also called free riding. Economists call it free riding, and it's very common in teams, and especially more so in some teams than others. I mean, it's really a norm. So just the norm about holding one another accountable is really important, and I can talk about that norm if you like, but basically what we recommend is that you list what are the things that you're going to call one another out for. What are we going to hold one another accountable for? And so that you kind of give people a heads up on what it is, ask them questions. When you are holding them accountable, you give them feedback, and it's not just the leader doing it, it's the whole team.
Yeah.
But that's true for all of the norms, right? So coming back to caring behavior, it's how we treat one another. It's not just the way the leader treats one another with respect. Or it's not just the way we support the expression, the leader supports the expression and says, I want to hear what you have to say. Or the leader talks to you in ways that are either optimistic or pessimistic. It's the way people interact with one another that matters. That's what matters in a team. Sets the tone, but collaboration is among the individuals. We don't teach people how to build collaboration among individuals. We teach leaders that their emotional intelligence matters, and we don't
Yeah.
teach them how to build an emotionally intelligent interactions among their team members.
No, it's okay. I love it. As you're talking, I was just thinking, I think this is hitting me maybe at the right time as well. I remember in 2021 or two, another author published with the Harvard Business Review, Paula Davis, wrote a book on teams. It was about not burning out, but it was very team centric. I was trying to appreciate the idea of how thinking of an organization, how it could be the teams that could change the culture. It doesn't have to be so reliant on the leader. But then I don't know, it just seems like everywhere I looked, it was the leader. And we know that the leader casts their shadow side really creates a lot of the dynamics in the culture. And so I just began thinking, if we can only, for years, I've been thinking, if we can just persuade these leaders to have a little humility and recognize that they can get some feedback too, and to participate in the team building and trainings that we're, at, because what does it say to the rest of the team if the leader's not there, and all of these things. But for some reason, I don't know. I think it's the validity of the research you've been doing. And I don't know. I just get it. I get it. Now, what I'd like to know is how. You pointed out it's about getting to know each other. That's significant. And it probably is a lot more than just the personality. Mm-hmm. And so, okay, then maybe it's assuming positive intent, but it's how does the group, leader or otherwise, say we're going to create? Is it artificial? How does it come intrinsically within the group?
Great question. So let me just say a couple things. First of all, I want to affirm exactly what you said, which is that the leader is the one who holds this in their hand. So we do need to build leaders' humility and emotional intelligence and recognition that these are human beings in your team who are emotional human beings with needs of their own. But what we don't teach the leaders is that their job is to build a team culture. So we tell them, go in there and do this. We don't tell them how. Our work, and it's not just mine, it's my colleagues, like my good friend Steve Wolf, who has been side by side with me all along. So what we did, started off with and then he joined me, is we went in and we looked at what was happening in the very best teams. So we looked at teams doing the same job. And I literally have walked between teams doing the exact same thing and just seen very different dynamics. Some of them, the leader's controlling everything. Because come on, when you're a leader, it's hard. You need that fearless sense of control. It's your job on the line after all.
Absolutely.
And so some leaders over control, some leaders under control, right? And that's my mentor used to say they're walking a tightrope, leaders they are. But one of the reasons they're walking a tightrope is because they don't know how to build a culture. And so what we found in those very best ones was that the leaders built a culture. And so we defined that culture with having 9 norms. I can talk more about that in a second, but I want to come back to your question about how do you do it. So I spent 20 years in a lot of organizations looking for the patterns across these great leaders. And then we took that model on the road. And this is what we did. Coming back to the engineers, right? And I can talk about other teams as well. But what we did was we measured the current level of these norms right now for them. So, are they respecting each other? Do they know one another? Are they evaluating how well they're working together as a team? Are they being proactive about looking ahead at what the problems are coming down the pike? Are they reaching to people outside, to their stakeholders, and getting information? And then we showed them the data. and we put it up on the wall. Now, obviously, we had to have the buy-in from the leader. The leader, we said, look, leader, we're going to make you a team member. You're going to fill out the survey like everybody else. And then we're going to ask the team what changes need to be made. We're going to have the team own. This is their culture. They can change it. I mean, the beautiful thing about working with cultures is that you can change it. It's not hard if you want to. And so one of the things that we like to do is we blew up the survey results. We put them on the wall. So people were walking around looking at, what does this mean? That only 2 of us feel respected in the team and the rest of us are down here at a 1 rather than a 5. And so then we looked at all of them. We said, okay, what do you think? Let's have a conversation. Now let's pick 3 that we're going to change. And this was the team's culture, right? What they did was they picked the 3. One of them was another one was about being more proactive in their problem solving. So, and then the leader's job became, okay, how are we going to do this? I remember the leader was saying they had a meeting shortly thereafter and people weren't nodding their heads like they said they were. And so the leader said, come on, we got to support one another. And so the leader was able to encourage them to do what they said they wanted. Did that answer your question a little bit?
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. And I like that. I love that you're grounding it in a specific story that does help. And I'm sure that the data spoke to those engineers. I mean, it was like, yeah, if you're ready, and they must have, it seems to me, when you came to the training and then you're like, I want you all to get to know each other.
Yeah, actually, we didn't. We started off with something else, and then we realized they didn't know one another at all.
Oh, I see.
And so we huddled and we said, what are we going to do? Okay, we're going to do this exercise where they have to answer questions. And luckily we had them face to face, which, these days that's rarely true. But we had them answer some questions on a piece of flip chart paper, and each person had to answer these questions, one of which was, what does this team need to know about me? Right? What do I need from this team? What do I need from the leader? So these different kinds of questions, and they put it up on the wall, and everybody put it up on the wall, and then each person described it. And, I can't remember what the other questions were. And we saw this people started peeling I like to call it peeling the onion of who they are, what they need, and their little proclivities, their personality differences, right? And anyway, let me stop. Let you ask.
Well, it seems like we need to have a reasonable amount of norms that we could follow. So I like the idea of 3. I mean, how is it self-reinforcing? What does then happen? Do all teams just begin holding to those 3 norms, or what? I know that it is their culture to be able to change, but it's hard too.
It is hard.
Yeah.
So let me say a couple of things about that. One, there is a norm we have 3 clusters of norms. The first cluster is about taking care of the individuals, how we support one another's success. And that's where we get to know one another and we treat one another with respect. Again, I want to remind you, this is what we see in the great teams. It doesn't take a lot of time to do it. Second category is how we align, how we learn together and advance together, right? And so the first norm in that is something that we call do the team. We periodically step back and you say, how are we doing? What's going well? What's not going well?
Yeah.
And so what we recommend is that they do that. It's a routine. It's a norm. It means it's routine. Pretty quickly, again, any kind of intervention. And then we say, are we upholding the norms? All right. If we're not, what do we need to do to uphold? Why? Maybe we don't really want these norms. What norms do we want? That's built into the process.
That's great.
You're right. I mean, that's reasons why, we call the team leader the culture manager, which is that, somebody's got to hold the new culture in their hand and enforce and reinforce it. But we also recommend that the leader assign 2 team members to every new norm. So Chad and Vanessa are in charge of the norm, addressing unacceptable behavior. Okay. And so you and I are going to figure out how we're going to bring that up. So we're in charge of the leader, but the leader has to, Vanessa and Chad, have you yet come up with the list of unacceptable behaviors that you're going to run by the team? And, all kinds of things that you might have to do after the original intervention so that you have, we try to layer things so that there is the support. Now, does it work for everyone? No. We still have a lot of reticence, but once they do get it going, it really changes things. And once you change one norm, none of these norms are mutually exclusive. So for example, coming back to that one team, I should probably talk about another team that we worked with. that was not meeting its potential, and the leader was getting ready to retire and had just composed this amazing team of individuals who were, of course, competing one another for his attention.
Right.
And they just felt so good about being able to control their culture now. Oh, they had some control over keeping that from happening. And they had some way of getting to know one another. And now I got to tell you what my skills are. And I had permission to do things I hadn't had permission to do before. It just depends on how you're defining which norms you want to take on. But giving the team and the leader control of the culture is a powerful intervention. And by the way, every team already has a culture.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Right.
Is it serving you well? Is it
Mm.
using the talent in the room? So anyway, blah, blah, blah. That's what we do. And does it work perfectly? No. And are these teams great all the time? No, but they get better. They are better than they were.
Yeah. Okay. So this does naturally just bring up this question of dealing with the difficult personality. We won't call them toxic necessarily, even if maybe they are. But you have some interesting insights on this, because I think the easy answer is get rid of the toxic personalities in the workplace. And you are suggesting, I'm sure there's a point in which if they aren't abiding by the cultural norm, but what do you have to say about the juice that they might be bringing to team dynamics?
Yeah. Yeah. I have some very specific feelings about that and specific way of thinking about it. Let me first say that I think that there's 5 or 10% of people that just don't belong on a team. And
Okay.
my mentor used to say, "Is there any way you can just meet without that individual? Is there some way you can sideline the person?" And there are
Hmm.
some people. So for coming back to that engineering team, the new leader actually let go of one member and it had an impact. That one member was just, so negative about everyone else and so complaining about everyone. And there was kernel of truth in what that guy was saying, but there's no way he was going to get on board. So I'm not opposed to that, but I have worked with enough teams now that I know that the person who's the toxic personality is often the canary in the mine.
Hmm.
So let me elaborate. So we call this person in social psychology, my field, we call this person the scapegoat.
Oh, yes.
And it's a great word. I had a student who looked up the origin of it once, and evidently in some Greek villages, they used to put everything bad on a
Yeah.
goat, and then they'd kill the goat, and they'd all eat it for lunch or something. You know what I mean? They'd put them on a skewer over a fire pit.
Rene Girard led the charge since the 60s. He had that great research on the scapegoat.
Yeah, that name sounds really familiar to me. So the problem is that in teams, um, we create norms that tend not to be very flexible. And sometimes there's somebody on the outside that the norms just aren't working for,
Mhm.
and they can't break through. And so they behave badly. And the research basically shows, there's a concept I haven't mentioned yet, but it's a really important concept. And it's called belonging in teams. I'm sure you've
Oh.
heard me or others talk about this concept of belonging. It's
Hmm.
a deep need that we have as human beings that stems from living in tribes for many thousands, hundreds of thousands or million years, where if we were ever kicked out of the tribe, we were dead, basically. And tribes had very right. And so if you weren't with the program, you would get sent signals. And you could get with the program or you would be out, right? We still have norms that are tight and people tend to be the research basically shows that they try to ingratiate sometimes. They try to fit back in, and we don't let them back in very easily. You can't force yourself in. These people feel like they don't belong. They get treated. It's a reinforcing spiral for them. Once they're the scapegoat, they're continually the problem. What happens is they lose their ability to self-control. So, coming back, researchers can't figure out why they just start behaving like jerks. It's because they can't get back in. And so what we've found in our practice is that when you put up on the wall or the data in front of the folks, and they can see that not everyone feels respected in the team. It's never just that one person. that one person is embodying, right? And you
That's just really
the
interesting.
team control over what's going on, including the person who hasn't ever had any control because they don't agree with the norms, but they've had an opportunity to change the norms. They all of a sudden feel a greater sense of control they haven't had before. They get listened to. And I've seen so many scapegoats enter the team once you give them the opportunity to discuss the norms, what's working for them, what's not, and how they think the team would be better off. I can give you a story of that if you want, but it sounds Pollyanna-ish, but I got to tell you, it's just fascinating when you talk to these people who are so-called, problem people.
Yeah.
They always have a story.
This is interesting. I'm thinking of my own experiences in the workplace, and I'm trying to wrap my head around, would that person have melted into the cultural norms if given the chance? I do see how in some cases I think that's an amazing concept, and it takes a real open-mindedness, especially on the part of the leader, to even identify that as a possibility.
Yeah. Well, let me say this though.
Okay.
Again, it's so easy to have everything that's bad on one individual. It just solves so many problems.
Yeah, that's true.
I got to tell you, we've had this research on problem team members and the information they can add that's valuable to the team for 40 years. We've been talking about it, and the leaders, and one of the reasons I wanted to write this book is I wanted to share this research with people who would read it, not the other academics. I mean, I got a book on the shelf right here that shares decades of research by a University of Berkeley researcher, last name Nemeth, who has showed over and over again how that toxic person is the key to positive change in the group.
That's
Even the
amazing.
key, yeah, innovation comes from outliers. It's the same thing when you're having a conversation. We pick up, we listen, what's good, where's the team going? And then some person says, what about blah, blah? And then you look at the person and say, what are you bringing that up for? I got to tell you, 9 times out of 10, the outlier is where it all starts. That's where the innovation comes from. The innovation doesn't come from all the people who are agreeing and getting along in the middle. You've got to allow those other voices. That's what teamwork is about. That's why you've got a team. Be careful of the norms that make you so cohesive that people can't disagree or be an outlier or they get attacked.
I kind of want to ask you about
Yeah,
your
sorry.
thoughts on the Tuckman model, but I don't know. It might be that all of this applies within that easy analysis. I'm actually I'm losing my thought because I wanted to ask you a question about that. I was trying to take the person. Well, I forgot. That's okay.
I can make a comment on the Tuckman model. I think it's a good way of thinking of it. It provides some good information, which is that you want to let people disagree. You can't just have everyone agree that certain norms, so it's forming. Everybody's very polite in the beginning, right?
Right.
And
Yeah.
that's where people disagree about how you're going to move forward. And that's one of the reasons why I like the model is because I like leaders to know that storming is okay.
Okay.
Disagreement is, we want to encourage some disagreement. And then norming is when you kind of settle in. But I would add to that, you've got to then reevaluate. You've got to review the team mentality where you step back and you say, what's working well, what's not working well? What
Yeah.
are our norms? Is everyone participating? Is everyone not? What's holding us back? What do we need to pay attention to for the future? And, when you turn this into a norm, you get it done pretty quickly. So it's not a big time sink.
Thanks for that. And I did remember my question, which was I would imagine you must then disagree with that idea of slow to hire, quick to fire, where it's usually the other way around, right? It's usually quick to hire. We really need this, and this person's been a problem for a long time, and we tolerate it.
It does sound like that. Yeah.
Not just releasing people.
Yeah, because I just have seen so often people get labeled problems and never have an opportunity. But let me say this. I follow my mentor. I had a really good mentor, Richard Hackman, who was one of the foremost researchers on team dynamics in the world before his untimely death of lung cancer. He basically found in his research that you really needed to hire the people who have the skills. And so I really think if it takes you long time to hire for those skills, That's worthy time.
Competency.
You've got to have competence where it's needed. And then the next thing he said is that then you've got to have norms that then support the effective interactions of your team members. And so where I took his work, the next step was I defined those norms. We went out and looked, and he was on some of my early committees looking at some of that research with us, defining what those norms. Here's a set of norms you can begin with as you define what you might want to do for your norms. So that's important.
Yeah.
It's easy to fire people. I do think that there are people that need to be fired, but I also think that you ought to look internally and think what's going on first. Is there something that we're doing? Are we not listening to someone? So, my colleagues and I worked with a team once where all the individuals had emotional intelligence training. They were really trying to beef up this, and the team still wasn't interacting well. And there was one terrible outlier who was the scapegoat. It wasn't until they started exploring the norms, and this person was so unhappy with the way things were being done. And when that person came along, the team just flew. It was brilliant,
That's awesome. That is so interesting. While we still have some good fresh energy, we've been digging in great here. Let's try this rapid round.
Okay.
Are you ready?
Oh, I'm always ready.
Okay. All right. I love the spirit of that. Just 8 questions. Really, whatever comes to mind first. Okay. Number 1 norm from your model that people most often misunderstand.
Yeah. It's called understand team members, and this is the one that you've got to get to know one another around. And it's so important. So important. So that's my favorite norm. I used to think it was ridiculous, and it came up.
I bet they think that's a waste of time too.
Yeah.
So that is good to know where that's headed. One thing leaders say they do that looks like emotional intelligence, but isn't.
Rapid response for that.
I know some of these are challenging.
I'll tell you, they say that they've clarified the mission and the goals when they haven't really.
Ooh.
And that's not strictly emotional intelligence, but they always think that they've clarified it, and the leaders and the team members tell me they haven't.
That's right. Clarity is kindness. 3, favorite question you ask a team to open up belonging.
What are you most excited about with regard to this team, and what are you most nervous about with regard to this team? Bring up emotions and permission.
A simple ritual you'd recommend to teams under stress.
I would go around the team and give 30 seconds for each person to ask the team for help on whatever they need. What do they need from the team? Everyone gets 30 seconds to say how the team could be helpful to them.
I love that. Book other than your own that most influenced your thinking on teams.
Yes. Social by Matthew Lieberman. 2013, waiting for new edition. He's a social neuroscientist and just rocks the world. He's the one that says, now that we know how important belonging is and how important how we treat one another is in the workplace, we need to change the way we work together. Yeah.
So I got to check that one out.
Yeah.
6, worst myth about emotional intelligence at the team level.
It's just about being nice to everyone. Emotional intelligence is also being honest, and getting permission to give one another feedback.
If emotional safety were weather, what would it feel like when it's present and when it's absent?
When it's present, it would feel calm, few clouds, 70 degrees, just calm, and where we can all just be homeostatic. That's safety. I can be myself without worry. When it's not there, it would be a scary lightning storm. You just never know if it's going to hit. You just got to self-protect.
One thing you'd change about how companies typically train leaders in team building.
Yeah. I would teach them that their job is to build a local culture in the team, and that it's not about individual skills, it's about the interactions. How are you going to build interactions that help everyone thrive and lift people up. I mean, that's what we know that great sports teams do. That's what we know that great musicians do when they're working in bands or symphonies. They have to lift one another up in order to perform at their best. And so it's about how the individuals interact, and that's culture.
Woo, so good. Vanessa, I saw your stuff getting promoted from some others on LinkedIn. It looked intriguing. Thanks for showing up. It's so nice to meet you and have a conversation with you here. I think there's some real synchronicity. We're all standing on the shoulders of others, but it's research I have not myself. Thank you for publicizing and researching these findings.
Well, thank you. Thank you for the work that you do. We're all aiming in the same direction, and we're all adding our piece.
Thank you. Yeah, and this does inform the way that I think I want to approach some trainings that we have coming up. I'm going to screen share really quickly here to let everybody just see. There is your book on Amazon, The Emotionally Intelligent Team. Subtitle, Building Collaborative Groups That Outperform the Rest. It was just released, July 22nd, a couple of months ago. So check this out. You've got even in audio CD. I didn't even know they still did that these days, but you got audio books and audio CDs. So lots of ways to engage with that material. Where can they find you? Learn more about what you do.
Yeah, thanks for asking. They can find me on LinkedIn. Please message me on LinkedIn. You can also find me on my website, and there are some resources on my website that people might find interesting. My website is VanessaDruskat.com, and would love to hear.
We'll put that in the show notes. Sounds great.
Great.
Thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure.